In a dual first responder home, there are times when first person and vicarious trauma must coexist. We may experience the traumatic incident firsthand and then hear the other person's view of the same incident when we are home together. While the differing perspectives can be beneficial, it's not always true. Every person's reaction to a singular incident is different, and sometimes it can be difficult to remember it. Lisa and James Robinson are a dual first responder couple that have and continue to work through traumas both individually and shared. They share how they stumble through and what they have learned to help and support themselves and each other. Stay tuned. You are listening to the Code for Couples podcast.
Welcome to the Code for Couples podcast, focusing on topics for law enforcement officers and couples to keep you and your relationship connected, resilient, and code for. Now, your host, law enforcement expert Cindy Doyle, author of Hold the Line and My Wife.
Hey there, welcome back to the Code for Couples podcast. I am your host, Cindy Doyle. Today, we have a couple who was brave enough to come and talk to me about what they have gone through and the trauma that they have experienced separately and together, and share a little bit about their story. Lisa and James Robinson are on here with me today. Thank you very much for coming on, y'all. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. So they are a dual first responder couple. They have been in the field since 2014. They've been together for 15 years, married for 13 years, but they have a combination of experience of volunteer firefighter, law enforcement, working in the jail for detention, I assume, with that, EMT, 911 dispatcher. There is a huge combination. And I'm telling you, I was checking with Lisa and I said, "You were a volunteer firefighter?" And she says, "Yes, I was." So there is a plethora of experience. Can y'all talk a little bit about your individual experience first in the field?
I started at a fire department, I don't even know, probably back in 2008, some in that area. I worked my way up from volunteer to captain and eventually taking over as chief.
Oh, wow.
And then trying to get more time with the family, I gave that up. And law enforcement, started that in 2014 as a reserve. And then 2016 became full-time. And then here recently became a patrol sergeant.
Oh, wow. Okay. So long career, both in fire and in law enforcement as well. So seen a lot. And Lisa, walk me through your journey.
I started working in a large jail in 2003. And while I was there, I worked a lot with medical and decided I wanted to be an EMT. And so I went to school. And after receiving my EMT license, I went to work for a small service in my hometown.
Okay.
And after a couple of years there, we lost our service. Like a lot of small services have ambulance services, there's no funding. And as a result of that, that's how I became a firefighter. When we lost our service, they put several of our EMTs onto the volunteer fire department so that we could continue providing some sort of medical service.
Mm-hmm.
And so from there, I was there for about 8 years. I continued to work on an ambulance service, a couple of other services, until 2013 is when I decided to apply for a dispatch position. And I was there for 7 years full time. And then I left, better scheduling, more family time, those types of things. But I missed it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went back part time for a short time. And out of all of my public safety, I think the dispatcher was probably my favorite.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So I often wonder, I know what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about vicarious trauma and first person trauma and how that blend of trauma and coexisting and how do you have a relationship with trauma, being compassionate towards each other, we're going to do that. And in working with dispatchers, because I do a class here locally for dispatchers, and various people come from out the state to come to the dispatchers because it's on burnout and resilience. And we talk about trauma. And I think there is a unique opportunity for trauma for our dispatchers and our telecommunicators, because there's not a lot of doing that you can do. And it's very auditorial as opposed to like using hands or tactile or and so the stories that get made up in our dispatcher's head create a tremendous amount of trauma, always trying to guess at what they're hearing on the other end. We could talk about that for days, but because you've had those three different experiences, I don't want to say like, which is the most traumatic, but do you also agree that there's like you've been exposed in different ways to the possibility of trauma, secondary trauma, or direct trauma?
I do. For me, it's been kind of strange. The things you see and do as an EMT, there's some of it that will bother you. But I think going into that, because you're trained, people, you can't stop it. People are going to die. People are going to have injuries. People are going to have car crashes. Those things don't tend to stick because you anticipate it. You know that's going to happen. Yeah. I was kind of naive when I went into the jail, and I never thought about the suicides. I never thought about people dying. I never thought about people trying to hurt or even kill each other when I went to work in a jail. And so those were fairly traumatic.
Or threats against you. I don't know if you had that experience, but I know other people do. Yeah.
Occasionally. But for me, the hardest part was definitely the dispatch side, because like you said, you hear it all. And we're taught that your job is to take the information that you receive and paint a picture for our responders so that they have an idea of what they're going to.
Yeah. So you're creating a story and then sharing that story.
Right. But the problem is, to paint that picture, you have to create a picture in your own head.
Yeah.
And sometimes that picture is much, much worse than what it actually is on scene, but very rarely do we get any form of, hey, this is what it actually looked like, or this isn't what it looked like. So there's nothing to confirm or deny whatever we came up with in our heads.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's probably one of the things that dispatchers struggle with the most.
Yeah, I agree. And I just wanted to highlight that because not everybody thinks about it. And I have such a compassionate heart towards, after working with the group of dispatchers over the last several years, that it's just unique. And we sometimes don't give dispatchers credit for what they do. And so I wanted to take time to do that. So tell me a little bit about y'all's story about the direct and vicarious trauma. When did you realize it? What was going on in y'all's relationship or independently? What you don't see is they're both like looking at each other right now. Like, who's going to go first?
So I have to admit, this guy, it took him all of 14 days into his full-time service to be a ship magnet.
Oh,
yeah. So it took literally 14 days.
Wow.
He got his first pursuit, which I was dispatching for. I dispatched when I was a dispatcher, I dispatched for his department. And it just snowballed from there.
Okay.
I would say the first time that we really started to experience true trauma together, his first year was a doozy, let me tell you.
Well, I mean, like you're saying, like, I love that you use that term, the ship magnet, because it's like, yep, I understand exactly what you mean. Yep. And everybody listening does too.
So about 10 months into his full-time career, we had an officer shot. I was working. I had dispatched him. We would get calls all the time. We live very rural. And we would get calls all the time. Hey, my neighbor's shooting or somebody's shooting in the area. Can you check on it? And we would send deputies or our officers out, check on it. No big deal usually. this particular time, they said, it sounds like they're shooting automatic weapons. So we hear that all the time. Didn't really think anything of it. So we send them out and they get on scene. And one of the officers that was there is a close friend. Actually, he was one of his groomsmen in our wedding.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he calls in. He's talking to my partner on the phone. He has like 9 driver's licenses he needs to check and everything. Well, all of a sudden, my partner looks at me and he says, "Shots fired, shots fired." And I look back at him and I said, "What?"
Oh.
And then he says, "Sean's been shot." Heart sank. And you have, as a dispatcher, you only have 0.2 seconds to think about what you just heard before you have to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go back and listen to those recordings, you can hear it in my voice in the background because he was still on the phone. It's so funny now to me. You can hear me say, "Oh, Wade." And that was my partner's name at the time. And I couldn't figure out in that moment after dispatching that what was next. The trauma had started within the first 2 minutes of hearing shots fired. So kind of suck it up and get stuff going. The things that I didn't think about at the time, our officers were non-lethally shot. They fully recovered. The things I didn't think about at that time, though, was he was at home. He should have been on shift. And I didn't, number one, it never really occurred to me. But I had to dispatch a fire department. And it was our fire department.
Okay.
And it didn't occur to me at the time that I had just sent my husband unarmed with the fire department to this shooting. In my head, you were. I didn't know till 15 hours later. But there were just a lot of things like that that I didn't think about at the moment that I had just sent my husband with the fire department into this scene where we didn't have a lot of details other than people were shooting at people.
Right.
And so that was one of the things that I didn't think about at the time.
When did it come to mind for you? When did you go, "Oh, shit"?
Probably when I got home sometime the next day.
Okay.
So yeah, there was a lot of that type of stress that came on afterwards. Of course, there's the original stress of just the situation in general. But then I started thinking about the situation as a wife.
Right.
And then the stress of the fact that it was a close friend.
Yeah.
And so like there was all of those things that kind of piled up. And then I'll let you talk about some of the things that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like she was saying, that should have been my shift. When I was going to the academy, I ended up getting hurt during defensive tactics. So I had to go back in October to do that part. So my shift got changed while I'm doing that. So, I mean, there was a lot of guilt that I wasn't there, anger that I wasn't there. And that was the biggest thing with that. And then obviously knowing that she had to be on the phone while it was happening and things like that. So it was a lot. It was a lot that first year. And then we really never confronted it until here recently, back in the past couple of years. We really kind of went through realizing we're fucked up. we need to do something. But that was back. We had no debriefing
Right.
about it at all. The next January was another part. The guy that I basically sat with for 15 hours on that shooting got killed in a on-duty car crash. So it wasn't our department, but we worked really well with all the departments around us.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of integration. They're in Oklahoma. So yeah, there's a lot of integration and collaboration up there.
But and he was kind of one of the mentors in a way early on in my career. And that added on to everything. So it was pretty rough.
So what was sneaking out? What were the what was the, I don't want to say the impact, but behaviorally, what starts happening between the two of you or internally, either independently or also like as a couple? I imagine that impacts things, right?
Yes. One of the things that's really hard, and obviously you being married to a Leo, you understand this. It's really hard for them to turn off certain aspects of being a cop.
Absolutely.
Some of those things that are just so ingrained into them. So there's been a lot of times when I need to have a conversation that I have to be like, okay, look at my face, turn the cop off. I need to talk to you as a spouse. I don't need a cop right now.
So what were you looking for when you think about when you're saying like, I don't need the cop? What were you wanting that you didn't feel like you were getting from him?
In 2021, it was the 5-year anniversary of that shooting.
Okay.
We all know anniversaries suck,
Yep.
at least those types of anniversaries.
Mhm.
And I don't know really, other than the fact that we really hadn't worked through any of it, I started to have a lot of trouble. And it literally got to where I would function through the day to do my
Mhm.
job. I would come home, play the wife role, play the mother role, make dinner, hang out for a minute. And then I'd lock myself in the bedroom or the bathroom. And I don't know how much you knew. And a lot of times I would sit there and either stare into space, watch meaningless TV, or cry. And it got kind of scary.
Yeah.
And so finally it kind of came to a head when I had asked him for one of the CIT officers' phone numbers to make sure
Mhm.
that I still had the right phone number for
Can you
him.
tell everybody what CIT is just in case people don't know?
Crisis intervention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crisis intervention training.
Not because like I felt like I was truly in crisis, but because he was somebody that I trusted and somebody that I knew wasn't going to look at me from the cop lens so much, and the fact that I knew that he would know somewhere to go.
Yeah. You knew something was
Um,
wrong. You knew this
yeah.
wasn't you,
Yes.
is what I hear. Yeah.
And he did too. But again, it goes back to being a first responder. You hide it. You
Mhm.
don't want people to know. But it really did. It started to get scary. And so one night I just told him, I actually texted him, said, "Hey, I need you to come to the bedroom. We got to talk." And I will never forget the look on his face. He's standing in the doorway. And I said, "Listen, I need you to turn the cop off. I need my husband. I don't need an EOD evaluation.
Mm.
I need to talk to my husband because I'm not okay." And he's like, "I know. I know you're not okay. I've been waiting on you to figure it out." So I'm like, okay, here's the thing. I don't like myself right now. I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to hurt myself. We're all safe. I'm safe, but I need some help. I've got to do something because I don't like how I feel. And truly, honestly, the thoughts that went through my head at that point were, if I wasn't here, I wouldn't feel like this. If I wasn't here, my child wouldn't come and say, "Why is mommy crying again? Why is mommy sad?"
Mm. Mhm.
And so, like, those were the thoughts that had started to creep in. And those were the scary thoughts.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
It's almost like those thoughts are like you were burdening your family, is what I hear, and causing problems. And James, when you think of what you were seeing, because you said, like, I knew you were struggling, but I was just waiting for you to see. What was it like for you? You could see that she was going through this, but there was something that, obviously your thought was she has to see that for herself, right?
Yeah, for the most part, which we've gotten a lot better now. I didn't want to be an ass to her and say, "Hey, it's not okay. You need something." Um,
Isn't that interesting? Like now, what you're thinking, like now it's like, oh, you're somehow an asshole if you go up to her and say, like, hey, I think you're struggling, right? And you said, like, oh, we do it different now. But just that thought of like, it's somehow bad to call her out on what I'm seeing.
But here's the funny thing. A few years before, regarding a different incident,
Mhm.
I had seen the same thing. I had seen the struggles. And it was the same thing. I said, you need to come down here. We need to talk. And I'm like, because he was being an asshole. I was being a crybaby. He was being an asshole, like through and through. He had withdrawn. He was angry. He was irritable all the time. All of the classic signs. And so I just told him, I'm like, I know you're struggling. You're being an asshole. You don't have to talk to me, but you're going to talk to somebody. So, he was obviously a whole lot more compassionate than I was.
Sometimes direct is kind, though, right? Like being direct sometimes is just what you have to be, right?
It did work.
Yeah, I mean, part of that is as a couple, like what works for you as a couple. And I get, like, James, what you're saying is it's like, I didn't really know how to go to tell her, hey, I see you're struggling, because I didn't want to be the asshole, right? But then, Lisa, you're kind of saying like, it's okay. And I would say, like, also in my relationship, I have, like, we can do that with each other where I can be like, hey, you're being an ass. So, but it's really like what you give each other permission to do. Okay. So at that point, you bring him in and you're like, I'm struggling. He says, I know. You say, I need to do something about this. And so you're working through it at that point, or move in that direction.
Yeah. I got, and I believe this is one of the things that we had talked about previously. 5 years is what it took for me to find a culturally competent counselor.
Wow.
And 3 sessions, like legitimately 3 sessions. And she managed to get through to me that nothing I did caused this. It wasn't my fault. The things that I did were okay. 3 sessions with a counselor that focuses on first responders is what it took.
Mm-hmm. And it only took 3 sessions. But finding that person, and that's why it's so important, right? It's so important that departments have people that they have connections with, or, if you don't know somebody, you know me. So I'll help.
Well, I think that's one of the things that especially smaller agencies really, really need to think about is the prep work. We know in fire, EMS, police, dispatch, all of those things, we know shit's going to happen. Bad shit's going to happen. That's why we have jobs.
Yeah.
Do the prep work so that you have those counselors lined up, so that you have a good EAP. The foundations and the resources that are available when the shit hits the fan and people are struggling.
Yeah.
So
the prep work's important.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Absolutely.
So as you go along, both of you were saying that you saw this in each other. How did you wind up supporting each other during those times and maybe even after those times? What do you do? What did you do then? What do you do now?
I mean, we do write each other letters often. Got just a cute little notebook that's full now.
Yeah.
It could be, like she said earlier, as simple as, hey, I see you, I love you. Or it could be a whole freaking novel. Just being there for each other, spending as much time, communication. That's the biggest thing that is helping us.
Okay.
Like we really had to sit down. Honestly, it was kind of like New Year's resolution time. We literally sat down, and in the front of that book is the goals, what we're going to do to achieve those goals. We want to become closer as a couple. And so we've got to communicate. We've got to find that quality time. And that was one of the things that helped us through that, is even if it was just sitting together or laying in bed or whatever it is, it's that time that you build, that you reestablish that relationship. Because I can tell you our relationship got strained a little bit through all of that, because my thought was shut down. I'm that person. If I get angry or whatever, I shut down and I don't talk about it. And so like not talking about it and losing that line of communication makes it really hard.
So one of the ways that if you're going to work through either direct or vicarious or secondary trauma, however we want to classify that trauma, doing that as a couple, you're saying a big part of that is keeping those doors open, keeping those lines of communication open, and knowing that you need to do that now in order to prep for the future, right? Because, you know, James is a magnet. So 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 continuing to do that and continuing to keep that line of communication open is really important. Okay.
Another thing that we've really had to remember is first responders are fixers.
Yes.
And
How
in
did
some
that play out
ways,
with y'all?
it doesn't usually work very well. It goes back to that remembering your role, I guess, making sure you stay in your lane as a
Right.
spouse
Yeah.
and listen and don't think that you have to fix it.
After going through Warriors Rest training for the peer support and all that, it's all confidential until it's not, where you can't be confidential about if they're, homicidal, stuff like that. Playing as first responder couple, it's kind of one of those things when you are with them, it needs to be peer to peer unless she is starting to show the signs where she's going to kill herself or kill somebody else or something like that. It just play a spouse at home.
Yes. So what does that look like? I'm just curious because I think it's hard not to fix. Like I always say, like it's human nature to fix. Like we don't want people to suffer. And then let's throw on that added aspect that every day you spend fixing other people's problems, right? So what is it like? What goes on in y'all internally when you're listening to each other's struggles? Like you have to put that fixer aside, but is it like sitting on your hands, biting your tongue? Like, yes.
Exactly.
It is.
Exactly.
And sometimes I think I may be worse about it. And I think that's it almost maybe the female human nature to fix what's hurting, the
Yeah.
nurturer piece.
Yes.
So it's like, I got a lot stacked against me.
Yeah, it's so hard not to just do that. Okay, so open communication, listen, don't fix. What are some other things that have helped?
Setting some boundaries,
Tell
knowing
me about that.
or maybe knowing the boundaries,
Okay.
knowing when you can help and when you can't.
Knowing what you can share and what you can't.
Tell me about that a little bit. What do you mean what you can share and what you can't? Because as a dual first responder couple, I figure like you've seen similar stuff, right?
For the most
Right.
part, there's some things that I will keep to myself because
He protects me.
if there's a child involved in our county, I'm part of it
Okay.
every time for some reason.
Yeah.
Those,
She just rolled her
those-
eyes, by the way.
Yeah.
and it's
Good at
the
that.
truth.
Yeah.
But that's something that I don't want, and I try to keep everybody else away from the scene too as much as I can because I don't want other people to go through something like that too.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird. I've been through so many that I kind of know how to take care of myself now,
Okay.
apparently, and know what I need to do to make sure I'm okay.
But that's something that you protect Lisa from
Yeah.
Yeah,
is
So, like,
the child situations.
100%.
Obviously, my background helps. He can come home and he can tell me the blood and guts story. He can come home and tell me about the fighting story. I'm probably be like, oh, and what happened next? But but like you said, there are some things that he leaves, that he does not come home and tell me most of the child stuff.
And she knows.
I can usually tell, or he'll tell me a general statement.
Mhm. So you have a clue of what he's
Yeah.
going through, but don't need all
Right.
the details.
And a lot
Okay.
of times I can tell when he comes home how he interacts with our son, exactly like what it's been like.
Mhm.
Setting those boundaries or maybe learning the boundaries as you go along. Hey, you can't come home and tell me about that again.
Okay.
And
And
I
communicating
can't.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't do that. And then remembering those in the future and knowing those boundaries.
Okay.
And then I think another challenge is not taking on their trauma. leaving it as their trauma, so that you don't wind up with the vicarious, because it's really easy for him to come home and tell stories and, oh yeah, that's really bad. And now, like, I'm trying to picture it. I'm trying to live it. Well, no, I need to listen to it. Listen, acknowledge it, let it go. And that's not always easy.
Yeah.
Because again, we're fixers and you can't fix it if you listen, acknowledge, and let it go out the other ear.
Yeah. I also think that maybe a secondary part of that too is that if we didn't get here in a bubble, right? So we have our own stories and our own thoughts. And so if something tags to that, or I've also seen people of like spouses that like it changes their worldview, if that makes sense. And so sometimes I think that that's important. But I love how you said that, like, listen, acknowledge it, right? You're staying with them. But and even when you had like your hands, she had her hands out a little bit, like there's a wall there. But like, listen, acknowledge it, let it go, that it's not yours to hold on to. And being aware that your spouse is going through it, whoever that is, right, is really important. So you know what's going on with them. Okay, good.
And
So,
something else we figured out too is my trauma may be horrible to me. If she goes through the same thing, she's completely fine. Everybody's trauma is different. So that's
Yeah, we can go through same stuff and it impacts us
mhm.
differently, right?
Mhm.
It's how
Yeah.
we attach to it. Yeah, that's a great point.
And then it's also remembering that trauma is trauma
Hmm.
and vicarious isn't bigger or better. Direct isn't bigger or better. It's my trauma. Unfortunately, my brain gets to decide how big or bad that trauma is. You
Yeah.
don't. So just making sure, validate, and don't negate. Don't negate their trauma because
I'm like, oh, I like that phrase. Validate, don't negate.
don't negate their trauma just because they didn't see it, because they didn't put their hands on it. I got to hear it, especially, and that goes back to the dispatch piece. Not necessarily with him. He's always been very respectful of that. But a
Yeah.
lot of times that's not the case for dispatchers. Oh, you just heard it. I had to see it. I had to put my hands in it.
Oh, like
Well,
comparison.
yeah.
And so you're saying like,
So,
don't compare. Trauma
yeah.
is trauma.
Don't compare the traumas. All you're going to do is cause more trauma
Yeah.
and cause a lot of hurt feelings and cause people to shut down, which is the worst things.
Don't one up each other.
You said validate, don't negate. And I'm wondering if part of that too, if we can use that phrase on ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah, you agree. Because I'm
Yes.
thinking a lot of times in this field, we push it off,
Yes.
right? We say like, I'm fine, I'm fine.
Yeah.
But
We all know what FINE stands for. I know I've heard it on your podcast a million times. We all know what it really stands for.
Yep. So, yeah, but so validate, don't negate, and do that with your spouse, with your partner, with other people that you're working with, but also do it with yourself
Yeah.
to say, like, hey, just validate that you just experienced this and that you're human, right? And that it's okay for you to be struggling. And that would be huge. That's great. I don't know where you got that one from, but I'm running with it. That's
It just
great.
kind of popped in my head, not gonna lie.
Oh, go register that trademark. Yeah, that's great. Validate, don't negate, guys. Okay, good. So we have all of these different aspects. We have the communication, the boundaries, validate, don't negate. Everybody goes through some things differently. So part of this, one of the things that y'all told me was that really this trauma, whether it's direct or vicarious, it can coexist. And so for y'all, how do you make space for it as a couple, and how does it coexist for y'all even now? Because we don't just like, oh yeah, I washed that stain out, right? Because we're all changed when we go through those things. So
I know here recently, I did call her out. I was not an asshole about it. I basically said,
Yeah.
maybe you ought to go talk to somebody while we're here. And she did, and it helped. So,
There's that.
So part of it is that y'all have learned, you've learned
learned
what
the
to look out for in
signs.
each other.
And part of that is just being together this long and
Yeah.
learning as we go, make it up as we go sometimes. Another part is he took the critical incident stress training several years ago, and then we both have taken it. I guess it was in the fall, and so we've learned the official signs. I guess the clinical. I don't know if that's the right word to
Yeah.
use. So we've both learned those signs, but we've also learned what those look like in each other.
Yeah. I think that's really important that you're saying, like, what is it? You can know what it looks like on paper, but seeing what it looks like in each other. So what are some things that y'all watch out for in each other? Like what do you notice, James?
I would say sleepless nights for her, but she don't sleep worth crap anyway.
Okay.
The closing herself off, the snippiness sometimes.
I know when things get really stressful, I start having nightmares
Okay.
about certain events.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that I've learned for myself. He's on nights right now, so he doesn't always experience the nightmares. Unfortunately, my child does.
Okay.
With him, he gets kind of withdrawn at times.
Mm-hmm.
He can get irritable, becomes less of the family person, I guess. Like I say, he just kind of withdraws. He's there, he's not there.
So how do you confront each other?
Mine's usually a lot more direct. Mine's,
Okay.
okay, are you okay? Because you're not acting okay or you're being an asshole.
Okay.
You know.
Yeah.
Direct but respectful. So,
Yeah, we try to maintain the respectful
Yeah.
aspect of it. I think he's learned that being an asshole to me and saying he's not going to succeed if he comes to me and says, "Hey, you're being a bitch." That's not
Right.
going to work. You know,
Not what you want to say. Do not say that.
it's not going to work for me.
no.
Mhm.
Where like I can, unfortunately, and I can go to him and be like, "Okay, you're kind of being a jackass here. What's going on?"
Yeah.
So he's a lot more compassionate than I am in that regard.
And I think that's important to try to like figure out how do we confront each other where you each can hear it, right? You can't like at this point, obviously, James, you had said like, hey, maybe you should talk to somebody while you're here. And you can receive that. But just randomly walking up to your spouse and go, you need therapy, like is probably not the way to do it, right? So it's great that y'all have figured out how to confront each other and like let each other know. It's like you're each other's radar. That doesn't make sense, but you know what I mean? Like you're each other's barometer to kind of say like, hey, I'm sensing this. That's good.
And we've also learned the times of year, like certain
Oh.
seasons of the year when
Mhm.
anniversaries come around. Like October is bad, January is bad. Like
March.
the first,
March.
the first 4 months of the year are bad.
Okay. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
but we've just kind of learned, and not all of it's been professional trauma. Some of it's just personal trauma, but we've learned those times of year to look out for them so
Mhm.
that, we can kind of catch it before it hits that, okay, you're being an ass step. And so we've kind of learned that as well.
So a lot of signs, a lot of symptoms, a lot of communication, a lot of like really like really seeing each other is what I'm hearing is that's how this has kind of changed your relationship. Do you think that it's strengthened your relationship in a way going through this together?
Absolutely. Especially here lately. It's been really interesting over the past few months. We just kind of hit that rough spot, and and what we learned though is we've been married for 13 years, and we really didn't know how to be married. We didn't really fuss and fight, didn't argue about stuff. But what we learned though is that because we weren't really fussing and fighting and arguing, we weren't always communicating the things that needed to be communicated.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's one of the big things that we have learned is that we have to communicate even when it sucks.
Yeah.
Even when whatever is getting ready to be said is going to hurt or suck, you have to, because otherwise it's going to come out eventually and usually in the worst moments. So
I think that's the hardest part. I think that's hard for anybody, but then I think it's also hard for first responder couples because we don't see each other. And so we want to spend that good quality time. And then there's also this aspect of any time that there's conflict and danger, then our bodies, your bodies react differently, right? So it was just an avoidance.
yeah.
That's one of the biggest things for a co-first responder couple that I think is slow down, because
Mm.
that's how most of our marriage has been. We have been constant, see each other in passing, slow down as much as you can, date, chase after each other. I mean, just act like you are still trying to win your partner over.
Yeah.
Basically, is
Yeah.
the biggest thing.
Yeah. It's that intentional aspect is what I hear you saying is like being intentional with the time that you have. But I love the fact that you're like, hey, make sure that you're still, I call it wooing, still wooing your partner or dating your partner, or because, sometimes taking it for granted. My husband has said recently, I took her for granted. I just thought she'd always be there. And,
I've heard that recently.
oh,
I've heard that recently. It's really easy. And really not even just because of the dual first responder. It's really easy because of the schedules. He's right now
Mhm.
he's kind of permanently nights, and my current job is 8 to 5 Monday through Friday most of the time.
Yeah.
And so half of the week it's I come home as he's headed out the door. And so it's really easy to, unfortunately to say this, it's really easy to become married roommates.
Yeah, absolutely.
To lose the important parts of your marriage. It's so easy for that to happen when you're constantly, number one, you're constantly facing the stress of the job, but then you're also adding in not seeing each other, and you're trying to balance your work life. Right now things are crazy with my job, and
Mhm.
you're trying to balance my job, you're trying to find time with the kid plus find time for yourselves. And so it gets hard. And a lot of times you just kind of want to stop. You just want to stop it all and kind of take inventory and figure out where can I fix it? Goes back to that fixing thing. What can I do to fix it?
So we'll end here. What are a couple of ways that y'all have found to continue to date each other? What have you implemented?
It's back to the note writing to each other.
I love that journal idea. Yeah. And having a common goal, what I heard too, right? At the beginning. Yep.
The journal, we try to at least twice a month try to do a date.
I'm pretty fortunate with my scheduling. I can usually, my schedule can be a little bit flexible. And so there's usually at least a day that we can go to lunch.
Yeah.
You know,
Nice.
Date.
sometimes our day dates are Taco Bell and grocery shopping, but it's still time that we get to spend together and time that we get to talk or hold hands or whatever
Yeah.
without a radio, without our phones going off, without a kid saying, Mama,
Yes.
all of those
Right.
things.
And
Yeah,
while
totally.
while I'm working at night, I'll swing by the house if she wakes up or something and hang
Yeah.
out for a little bit. That's the
Cool.
joys of working where I live. So,
Yes. Yeah. Kind of make it happen.
mhm.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much. Any final words of wisdom that you want to impart?
I'll go back to what I said earlier about doing prep work. Even if you can't get your agencies on board, do your prep work. Figure out who your counselors are, figure out the resources that can help when the trauma does,
Mm-hmm.
when it gets there and when the shit hits the fan, where can you turn? We've learned a couple of different organizations. And I also want to throw a plug in for PCIS, the
Post-critical incident
incident
seminars, what
stress.
that is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. We attended one in 2018, and it pretty much saved his career and really kind of changed both of our lives. It just changes everything. You learn so much about how to deal with everything. And I know it's been addressed before, but PCIS is, I think here it's a 2.5 to 3 days. It's usually a weekend.
And it's usually it's almost always free.
It is completely free.
Right. And so when you're listening, if you're listening, I know of some PCISs throughout the US. And so if that's something that you're wanting to do, if you've gone through a critical incident, or if something is, it can also just be the compoundness, right, of the trauma. And so if you're going through something, or if you're struggling with some things, a post-critical incident seminar, or PCIS, is usually available in your state. So make sure that you Google or reach out, and I can try to connect you.
And one of the great things is the fact that they do try to include your spouse.
Not all of them do.
Right. Here they include the spouses, and they take care of you. There's counselors, there's small group sessions, there's all kinds of different stuff in there. The one we went to actually included relaxation techniques. And there was even a part on a little bit of financial education, because we all know that finances stress relationships. So yes, that's one of the things that will absolutely help a marriage especially the first responder trauma.
Yeah. So I love that advice. So make sure that as a couple that you're prepared with your backup, like know who your counselor is, or know who you could talk to, know where those post-critical incident seminars are, figure out how you're going to confront each other. What are those signs and symptoms that each other may be experiencing that you can talk to about? Were there any other plugs you wanted to put in there?
I will also throw in there, as a spouse, learn who your husband or your spouse is working with. Learn who your first responder is working with. Learn their supervisors. Learn the wives, girlfriends. Get to know the families. Get to know their partners, because you may not see it at home, or sometimes they see them more than we do.
Yeah.
And so they may see those signs, or they may know who in the department to contact if you need help with trauma at home. So get to know their coworkers, get to know the families, because that can also be a huge support system.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. James, Lisa, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I appreciate it so much. Like I said, it's unique first of all, it's unique to have a dual first responder couple, but then it's also unique that people are willing to come on and share their stories and to help other people learn from what they've gone through and their own struggles. So I know it takes some courage to be like, hey, I'll come share my story. So thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. And guys, until next time, keep it Code 4, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye. Don't forget to click that subscribe button on your device, or get email updates by going to code4couples.com. While you're on the website, make sure you pick up my 71-page workbook and guide that goes with my book, The Essential Guide to Protecting Your Law Enforcement Relationship. Drop in the code podcast and download the workbook for free. Until next time, y'all, keep it Code 4.
Thanks for joining us. For more information about the podcast or Cindy, check out coexist.com. All intellectual property rights owned by CRLD2 Ventures, LLC, are protected by the firm of 9mm, 45 ACP, 5.56mm, and 12 gauge.